Welcome back, guys, to another practical leadership. Kami.
Bloopers.
Welcome back to our practical leadership series here in Lumpia Bytes. Last episode, we talked about the garage mindset, right? On why execution beats ideas. And today, we'll talk about another leadership principle that often makes people feel uncomfortable, and that's failure. But let's pause for a second, right? Fail, fail, fail. When people actually fail, they get punished. And most incentives in the business and in the workplace aren't built to reward learning in failure. And also, what about the risk, right? If you tell people it's okay to fail, do you risk losing accountability? With AI redefining the workplace, managers and leaders face a new challenge. And how do you build a team with a culture that embraces failure as a way to learn while still demanding accountability to deliver? And that's what we'll be exploring today. So, Mooch, when you were in Silicon Valley, how did people talk about failure compared to how we usually think about it?
I was actually pretty surprised that people there were pro failure. So fail fast, break things, right? That's the mentality that's pretty much common in Silicon Valley. I would say that if you work in a company in a developing country, especially in the corporate setting, you're always afraid to fail. Because if you fail, you can get fired. It might mean millions in budget being wasted, right? You're accountable for it. So there's that form of I wanna keep it safe. I wanna play it safe and I don't wanna fail. And also sometimes in corporate settings, there's like a hierarchy. There's a hierarchy to things, there's ego into things. So people don't like failing flat on their face, right? But in contrast to that, when I was in Silicon Valley, whether it was Amazon talking or Airbnb or the startups that are, starting there, or even the VCs, they see failure as an experiment, meaning they calculate for failure, they plan for failure, they assume failure, but they don't glorify it in a way that failure is the goal. It's more like they accept that failure is the cost of success. And that if we need to fail, if we need to pay success a couple of failures in order to get to a certain outcome or a certain success point, then you pay it with failure. And that's a very scientific mindset. That's a very experimental mindset that I really saw in Silicon Valley.
Let's make this practical, Mooch. As a leader or a manager, how do you think we can build a culture that embraces failure and accountability at the same time? Because, like what we mentioned, there's risk, right? You said earlier about having a somehow calculated risk of failure, but how do you think you can find that balance, but still promoting the experimentation, and the culture of embracing failure?
Ooh, that's a good question, right? So the way that I see things is always like a spectrum or even just the negative and the positive. What's the extreme left and the extreme right of things? And the goal is always to be somewhere in the middle. It depends on what industry you're in. It depends what job you're in. So for example, we can't say embrace failure if it's a matter of national security. Or we can't say embrace failure when it's a matter of biology, medicine, life and death. We can't say it if it's a matter of data privacy or like security in general, right? So it really largely depends on what industry and what is your job function.
Mhm.
But just saying that embrace failure removes the shame of failing. And I would say that if in my life I would fail and I have failed a lot, let me be the first to admit it. So that is my tone as a leader, as an entrepreneur, and as a founder that I own up to. I try as I'm just a human being, imperfect in all of my ways, but I try as best to make sure that if it was my wrong decision, that I own up to that. And what I hope is that when people see me own up to my wrong decisions and take accountability for my actions, then hopefully they mirror that action.
Mm.
And that to me is my way of encouraging people to try projects, to try to not be afraid to fail. But if they do, to be the first to say that, hey guys, I didn't do a good job at this. I'm going to do better. And this is how I'm going to do better. Of course, you also have to balance it with the behavior of failing constantly, meaning you can't just allow people to fail and repeat what the same thing that they're doing, right? Doing the same thing over and over again and expecting different results is insanity. So I guess that's the way that I try to balance it. Meaning, if I fail today, I'm gonna do better tomorrow, and I'm gonna make sure that I won't repeat the same failure that
Mhm.
I've had. And then I move on and iterate. So the iteration part after failure or after a failed experiment is important because it means that you're not there to keep on failing, but you're there to keep on running experiments, see the results, and then iterate from there.
You mentioned a good point in the first few ideas in there. Correct me if I'm wrong. So basically, you start by setting a good example to your team that you can acknowledge your own mistakes, that you can acknowledge your own failures, right? Because imagine having a boss who can acknowledge his or her mistakes. That means that you can have your own mistakes as well. So parang you're not shy with your own failures. So it gives you parang a chance for you to experiment, to explore, to be creative because your boss can acknowledge mistakes. I like that setting a good example by learning how to acknowledge your mistakes with your team. Yeah.
Yeah, I learned that from you guys. I learned that from you. I learned that from Terrence. I learned that from Brian. I learned that from Vic. It was heavy on the HP culture that really taught me how to fail. Actually, if we think back about it, it they had a formula before in how we fail, right? Acknowledge. I forgot that it was a three-step process that we needed to acknowledge it. We need to say what's been done about it and how we can avoid it in the future.
Mhm.
And that's really what I've tried to follow all
Yeah.
throughout.
And I think that's the second part that you mentioned about that iteration that you will, you're not just going to fail and fail, but you're going to improve that improvement aspect, right? So the way I think about this is everyone is aware of post-mortem reviews, right? Every time you end a project or a sprint, you do a post-mortem, you try to understand what failed and you try to understand how can we get better, right? What you can do differently next time and how you can be accountable.
Yeah, definitely.
And you know, one thing that I wanted to share when in terms of trying to build a culture of failure without losing accountability, it's rewarding the behavior and not just the outcome. And I was just trying to look back, I realized that wow, this became like a foundation of my entire management career. There's SPO, situation, behavior, and outcome. So, at times when we're rewarding someone, we're too focused on the outcomes, right? On winning, we need to win. Oh, project successful, everything on track. That's outcomes. But a lot of times we don't focus on the behavior and the situation because you could be someone who's in the project where, it's so much chaos. This project is so difficult. Everyone knows that this is next level project, right? The behavior of the team was they really pushed through. They really did their best. You'll see that they suffered, they learned, they put on their best, but the outcome is still not good, right? So it's possible that the outcome is not as you wanted. I would say you can consider it as failure. But if you look at the situation and the behavior, that's actually, something that you can reward on. So I guess my point is it, for you to encourage people on learning through failure and still being accountable, try to recognize the situation and the behavior as well, and not just purely on outcomes. And it's funny because I'm trying to apply it with my son as well. So he had his first soccer game, official soccer league, right, last week, and he wants to win. He wants to get a goal. He wants to win. We told him, we just want you to show up and do your best, right? And showing up and doing your best, how? By trying to be on the ball, trying to stop the ball, trying to steal the ball. You don't need to goal, right? You don't need to get a goal. You don't need to win. You just do your best, contribute to the team, right? So, and for us, that's something that we can reward on us. If you get a steal, or if you play, you try your best, you can get ice cream and all this. So, so we tried it, and we were surprised that game. He's next level. He really tried his best. He's going after the ball. Result, they lost. He didn't score a goal, right? But if you look at how he played, right, how he got those steals and how really took the effort, you'll see the behavior is there, right? Situation, it was his first game ever. So those two things, so oftentimes we overlook because we're obsessed with the outcomes. So I think that's one way for me to build a culture that embraces learning and failure.
It's a lot of like wrestling with the ego because nobody wants to fail, right? It we all have egos and we all need to manage our egos and we all hate being shameful or failing. But I think it's the most humbling thing to try to learn, to fail, and then to get back up again because that's just life, right?
Yeah. This is a well-known recipe in the startup or Silicon Valley world, right? Like ship fast, fail fast. Because especially in technology, if it's moving fast, you want it to ship something out there so you'll know what's going to be the issues so you can fix it right away. It's an iteration. And that's why in project management, you have the agile methodology because get it out there and let's see how it works, get feedback, and then let's fix it. So it's the ship fast and fail fast approach, right?
Yes, definitely.
So let's connect this to AI, Mooch. So in today's AI driven world, why do you think fail fast, ship fast, or failing or learning and failing is important for leaders and managers?
I think the reason why that is that because AI right now is largely an experimental and emerging field. It's like shipping a drug that is being tested in the market. So all of the progress in AI right now is happening real time. We're being given access to tools that are not proven. Right? ChatGPT is not a proven tool, right? It works. It generates you an output, but is it delivering productivity? Yes, in some studies it is delivering productivity, but they're experimenting with the user real time, right? So the reason why leaders would need a kind of like a pro failure mindset is because it is emerging and experimental, meaning we have to try these tools. We have to experiment with them in our workplace. We have to have the courage to create a new workflow, to create a new way of doing things. Because definitely the way that we've been doing things for the past 20, 30, 40 years is going to change with artificial intelligence. And to some people, to some leaders, that's scary. Because if you've been doing your job for 20 years or 40 years, and suddenly there's this AI process or AI workflow or automation that's happening, that can freak you out, right? But it's important to try to have guardrails in order to facilitate failure and to make sure that when we do fail, it's a safe type of failure. The fear of failure should not stop us from trying. And I think that's what's important. So, literally, everything that we're going to be doing moving forward is an act of creation. It's an act of creation, whether it's creating a new process, creating a new system, creating a new way of doing things. And in the process of creating something, you can make a mistake, you can fail, right? But it's important to try because otherwise we would not progress.
But here's the thing, Mooch, right? So shipping fast also means higher risk of failure. I was just thinking, For example, in the morning, going to the office, if you're in a hurry, diba, parang that's high risk of you get trip, you spill your coffee, right? If you're always in a hurry, that's where you get into a lot of issues or feel like a lot of accidents, right? Just last week, we were in a hurry going to school. So my son tripped, right? And he got into an accident, a little bit of accident because we were in a hurry. So I told him we're gonna wake up 15 minutes earlier so that we're not gonna be in a hurry. And I'm just trying to connect it to AI. In today's AI driven world, do you think failing is more dangerous or riskier now? Because these AI projects, products or applications, if they fail, their impact can go beyond money and reputation. If their AI product has issues, it's not only their reputation, it's not only their investment that's on the line, but societal impact as well. These products can have impact to society, to humanity. And AI failures can lead to misinformation, extreme, or fake content, right? Could be loss of jobs and even mental health issues. So they're going to be using AI to screen job applications. And if that AI has issues, it can run into like discriminating people, right? And also if they are going to use AI on performance reviews, which, a lot of companies going to be automating performance reviews with human in the loop, of course. But still, if that performance reviews application, if they have issues, that's job on the line, right? That's job loss. So, I mean, there's going to be AI applications where it's going to be riskier and dangerous if you fail. And because the repercussions is not just company repercussions, but society or human um, implications. And what's your take on that one?
Wow, that is a question. my take on uh, my take on that one. So I have faith in. I think it's because I have faith in the human race as a species and as a society that self-preservation is at the core of our self-interest. So self-preservation is the most important thing that I think humans do. That despite all dangers that exist out there, we still want to live and we want to preserve the species at the core of our human survival. So, that being said, I think that we should acknowledge that all of the things right now are experiments. And it's literally unfolding in front of the public eye, in front of all of us. And with any experiment, there is really a risk for failure. And we just have to be conscious about that. Of course, it depends largely on what industry you are in, what job you're in, and what are you experimenting with. But there would always be low stakes and high stakes failure. What we should try to do is to try to balance those risks and just to make sure that we have guardrails so that if and when we fail, we can fail to the level of our guardrail systems, to the level of the catch all safety net that we've created. So, definitely having a system for guardrails that will help cushion us when we fail is important. But I think that with everything, with all the new tools that are springing out there, that are popping up, that all of this is an experiment. And we just have to be safe and conscious about it too, as a user.
Now I'm actually trying to connect it to AI being an experiment. And we mentioned earlier, AI is an experiment. That's why tech companies needs to be kind of fast embracing failure, right? But with this, do you think it could lead to tech companies being reckless, right, at the expense of other people? Because as we all know, it's a business. I mean, looking at what happened to, I guess, social media, for example, when it first came out, we saw the benefit of it. But at some point, you saw the repercussions, right, on the mental health and all these things. So I guess there's societal impact on these technologies. I'm just thinking, would AI cause tech companies being reckless because it's an experimentation and they have to shift fast and fail fast?
So the way I see things is a spectrum. Where it's either being reckless would be the extreme right, and then on the other side would be not doing anything. And then you have a middle ground here. So the way I see it is that you definitely don't want to be extremely reckless, but I think all of human progress has some recklessness in it, meaning we learn when we get a bruise or when we get a cut or when we get hurt. But I do trust that when we make mistakes, we tend to iterate and improve as a society. So that's why when I'm thinking, it's like if we don't do it, then what's going to happen? There is suffering in the world, even if we don't do it. But if we do progress, if we do innovate, then we have a chance to actually solve real world problems and help people have better lives. And I think if that is the end goal of an experiment, then it's worth taking those risks if it improves human lives. Am I making sense?
You really have a trust and optimism on society, on how they can discern, or maybe they can evolve out of whatever great changes that's gonna happen.
I trust in the institutions of checks and balances
Mhm.
that if something greatly evil happens, that eventually it's going to catch on and people will call you out for it. And I don't know if it's just my naive optimism, but do think that eventually things will be corrected, as everything in nature tends to be corrected. But that's my viewpoint and my perspective on things.
No, that's a good one. It's like a pendulum, right? It's always going to swing back at some point. It's kind of finding the right balance. The way I look at it, parang we're on the race, but we're really not rushing. Uh, because life is going on even without AI, right? But we know AI can make things better. That's why I'm really excited on AI on healthcare, for example, because there are things that, cancer that we can solve, right? And we can use AI to solve that. But office productivity and all these things, life will still continue without that. But we want it to be better. We want it to be, more optimized. And I think it's important for leaders, especially those building AIs, that though it's been fast, it's been experimentation, it's been a race, hopefully they'll understand, put up the guardrails for the people, for the society. But I love your optimism. Yes. Yeah. And and
I'm endlessly optimistic.
I love your optimism, not just in the technology, but in the society. Kasi parang, even if these companies, they push this technologies to people, it's really up to the people as well to be aware, to make decisions. That's why it's important to read those AI policies of those products. What could these companies do with your data, with your privacy? That's why it's important to have that kind of awareness and education on it. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I think at the core of it is that when we do create these tools, at the end of the day, we're creating a knife, right? A knife is one of the most useful human tools ever invented because it allows us to slice food, right? But it can also kill. But it's not the knife that's at fault when it's being used to hurt people, right? It's the humans using it at the end of the day. These AI tools, they're just tools. They will not do anything if not prompted by a human. And at the core of it, it's human behavior.
So much. Any final message for project leads, for example, managers or leaders watching us today, who's trying to build this culture of learning and failing and balancing accountability. So what's your final message to them with regards to failure?
I think the final message is that have the courage to start and try and fail, but have the intelligence to create systems that will act as your safety net if and when you do fail. Make sure that data security, data privacy, and whatever guardrails you need are built in the design so that any worst case scenario, like you don't build a building without a fire escape, right? If you build a building without a fire escape, you're asking for trouble. So make sure that in the architecture of whatever it is that you're doing, safety is at the heart of it, at the core of it, at the start of it. So that if there is something that God knows what happens, right? There is an exit, there is a safety net, there is a cushion that you can fall onto and keep you safe. So that's where I'm at. It's like, yes, try, yes, fail, yes, be brave, but use your human intelligence to build something that has a safety net, that has a fire exit, right?
So really failing intelligently.
Yeah.
Yeah, you be prepared to fail, but you have backup plans, you have buffer, or you have discussions.
Or you have a rollback plan, right?
Yeah. That's a good one. I think for me, failing is hard. Failing is hard. And I know if there's managers, leaders, project leads here who's in the middle of a failing project or who's in the middle of a project where you're swamped with issues, just always remember that that's where learning happens, right? When you're in a project where there's so much failures or issues going on, that's where you can really form a bond with your team. That's where you can really build that resilience. And that's where you can learn from failing. Because if the project is just smooth sailing, I think you mentioned this before as well, that we don't need project managers if the project is smooth sailing, right? If project managers are there to solve issues, to step up on situations like this. So if you're that kind of leader manager who's in the middle of that because we've been there,
Yeah.
just remember that that's where you learn and take that opportunity to form a strong bond with your team.
Yep, definitely.
So if you have any advice again to our viewers, for sure there's leaders watching this who's more experienced than us. If you've been in these situations, or just give us an advice, put in the comments below, on how you can promote a culture of learning and failing with accountability. If you have any tips or advice, write down in the comments below. We'll see you guys in the next episode. Thanks much for sharing your wisdom.
Thank you, Fush, for sharing yours. Bye, guys.
Bye.